Welcome to Classified Culture. This channel was created to provide new and original stories for anyone enthusiastic about science fiction and horror stories. If this is your first time listening, or if you are a returning member, thank you for your support and attention. If you are enjoying the content in today's story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a message in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel. Well, I suppose there is not much else to say, other than my favorite reason for being here has arrived. It's time to let the words I speak guide your imagination with a dark and twisted tale. In the hush of twilight, St. Mercy Hospital loomed like a monolith carved from obsidian. Its once pristine facade was now a canvas of decay, stained by time and weather. The grandeur of its past reduced to faded echoes in the chill wind that whistled through cracked windows. Evelyn Hartley stood before it, her heart pounding against her ribs with a rhythm as old as dread itself. The iron gates groaned open reluctantly, as if reluctant to grant her entry into this realm where shadows seemed to gather and multiply. She stepped inside, her heels clicking on the gravel path that led up to the entrance, each step resonating like a funeral march in her ears. The heavy doors, once grand and imposing, now hung loose on their hinges, swaying slightly in the breeze like specters impatient for her arrival. Evelyn hesitated at the threshold, her breath catching in her throat as she peered into the cavernous lobby. It was a ghostly remnant of its former self, echoing with memories both hers and those it had borne witness to during its heyday. The air smelled of dust and disuse, laced with an underlying tang of something acrid, like burnt offerings. She switched on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal the tiled floor, cracked and broken underfoot. Her footsteps echoed as she ventured deeper into the belly of the beast, each sound magnified in the silence until it felt as if the very walls themselves were trembling at her intrusion. The nurse's station stood like a rotting corpse in the center of the ward, its once busy counter now a graveyard of decayed ledgers and forgotten clipboards. Evelyn ran her fingers along its surface, leaving trails in the thick dust. She could almost see the ghosts of nurses bustling around it, their laughter echoing down the long corridors, filled with patients waiting for salvation that never came. A sudden noise startled her, a skittering sound from behind one of the empty rooms. Her heart hammered wildly as she pointed her flashlight towards the source. Nothing but shadows danced in its glare. She took a deep breath, steeling herself before stepping inside. The room was empty, save for an old wheelchair slumped against the wall, its wheels rusted shut like frozen limbs. As she moved further down the hallway, the air grew heavier, thicker with something unidentifiable yet undeniably malevolent. It prickled at her skin, raised the hairs on her neck, made her muscles tense in anticipation of flight or fight. But she pressed on, drawn inexorably towards whatever lay hidden within these hallowed halls. The door to the morgue was ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. She pushed it open cautiously, her stomach churning at what might lie within. The smell hit her first, a cloying sweetness rotted by decay, mingling with the harsh sting of chemicals long since evaporated from their jars. Then came the sight, rows upon rows of empty drawers, their contents removed or decomposed into nothingness. But there, in the corner, something caught her eye. A shape huddled under a stained sheet, too small to be an adult's body but large enough not to belong to a child. She approached it slowly, each step feeling like wading through treacle, as dread pooled heavy in her limbs. Her heart pounded wildly against her ribcage as she reached out trembling hands towards the sheet. Just then, a gust of wind blew through the open window, sending the sheet fluttering up to reveal what lay beneath. It was not a body but a mannequin, its painted face cracked and peeling, revealing layers of faded colors beneath like the skin of an onion weeping tears of time. Yet even though it was merely a lifeless object, there was something about the way it stared blankly at her that sent shivers down Evelyn's spine. Suddenly, she heard it again. That same skittering sound from earlier, but this time louder, closer. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. echoing off the cold walls until she couldn't pinpoint its exact location. Panic surged within her, threatening to overwhelm logic. She spun around, flashlight sweeping wildly over empty shelves, vacant drawers, before finally landing on a figure standing right behind her. It was another mannequin, this one dressed in the remnants of a tattered gown and cap, a parody of medical attire. Its arms were raised slightly, hands curled into claws as if ready to strike, or maybe plead for help. Either way, there was no mistaking the agony etched deep into its plastic features. Evelyn stumbled back, gasping for breath that caught in her throat like shards of glass. This wasn't right. None of this felt remotely normal or explainable by rational means. She had to leave, now, before whatever was haunting these halls decided it didn't want her here anymore. But even as she turned towards the door, something made her pause. A faint noise, barely discernible over the pounding of blood in her ears. A soft whimpering sound, like that of an injured animal. And with it came a scent, subtle yet unmistakable, the faint aroma of lilacs. Her breath hitched in her throat as memories long buried resurfaced, flooding back with such force they threatened to drown her. That scent, it was hers. Hers and his. Dr. Samuel Walker, her mentor, lover, tormentor. The man who had shattered her world into a million pieces before disappearing without trace. With heavy steps she moved towards the source of the sound, drawn inexorably despite every fiber of her being screaming at her to flee. Down another hallway, through a set of double doors, and finally into the operating theater where everything had gone so horribly wrong all those years ago. The room was bathed in shadows except for one solitary beam of moonlight falling upon the center table. Upon it lay not a body but a dollhouse, eerily reminiscent of the one she'd played with as a child. Its tiny doors were flung open wide, revealing miniature rooms filled with meticulously detailed furniture and figures. Dozens of them, made from porcelain or plastic or wax, each one posed in varying degrees of agony and despair. Some hung by nooses made of thread around their delicate necks. Others lay prone on tiny beds, arms outstretched pleadingly towards unseen saviors. Still more huddled together in corners, hugging knees to chests as if trying desperately to make themselves small enough to escape notice. And there, amidst the carnage, sat a single doll different from all the rest. Clad in surgical scrubs, its face painted with grotesque parody of her own features. It clutched a tiny scalpel in one hand and held out the other towards her, palm upturned as if begging for mercy or understanding. Behind it, inscribed onto the wall, in what appeared to be blood, but could just as easily have been paint or ink, were words that sent icy tendrils of terror coiling down Evelyn's spine. "Welcome home, Evelyn." She stumbled back. Hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs, like a trapped bird, but she did not run. Not yet. Instead, Evelyn turned on her heel and strode back out of the theater, leaving the dollhouse and its terrible tableau behind. She needed answers, needed to understand why this place, this hospital, had such a grip on her past. And if that meant venturing deeper into St. Mercy's decaying embrace, then so be it. The corridor stretched out before her, a seemingly endless ribbon of faded linoleum and peeling paint. She walked its length, fingers trailing along the wall for balance, for grounding. The air grew heavier with each step, charged with an electricity that prickled her skin and raised the hairs on her arms. It felt alive, this hospital. Watching. Waiting. A set of double doors loomed ahead, their once glossy surfaces now dull and scarred by time's relentless march. They bore no plaque or signage, but Evelyn knew where they led, to the ward where she'd spent countless hours tending to patients, learning from Dr. Walker. And later, much later, screaming as he tore apart her world. She pushed through them, entering a wide hallway lined with rooms on either side. The gloom here was thicker, clinging like cobwebs to the corners of her eyes. She reached out, found a light switch, flicked it. Nothing happened except for a soft click, followed by an eerie silence that seemed to mock her attempt at illumination. Undeterred, She ventured onward, letting her memory guide her steps. The fourth door on the left, she recalled. That was where she'd first met him. Dr. Samuel Walker, brilliant surgeon, enigmatic figure wrapped in rumors and whispers. The room was unremarkable now, just another empty shell stripped of its furnishings. Yet she could still see it, as it had been, a sterile white box filled with gleaming instruments, and the hum of quiet efficiency. As she stood there, memories played out before her like ghosts, the scent of antiseptic and lilacs mingling in the air, the cool press of his fingers against her wrist as he checked her pulse, his voice, low and reassuring, explaining procedures she barely understood at the time. And later, much later, his hands on her body not with professional detachment, but with hunger, with desperation. She shook herself free from the past's clutches, moved on down the hallway. More rooms, more memories resurfacing like corpses dragged up from deep water. Each one seemed to pull her further back in time, until she felt like a specter haunting her own history. Then came the sound again, that soft whimpering noise, barely audible over the thrum of blood in her ears. It was fainter now, but no less chilling. She followed it, drawn like a moth to flame, until she found herself standing before another set of doors. These were different from the others, solid wood instead of metal, adorned with intricate carvings that seemed almost organic. A vine-like pattern ran along their length, leaves and tendrils twisted into shapes that might have been flowers or faces or something else entirely. At their center was etched a single word: orchard. To me, and Evelyn reached out, traced the letters with her fingertips. Her heart pounded in her chest, echoing through the silent hospital like a distant drum beat. She knew this place too, knew it all too well. Behind these doors lay the ward where they'd kept the orchard patients, those deemed beyond hope, beyond help. Their bodies had been twisted by disease or accident, their minds shattered by trauma or despair. And among them was one who had haunted Evelyn's nightmares for years, little Jane Doe, as they'd called her. The girl with skin like bark and eyes that held entire galaxies of terror. With a deep breath, Evelyn pushed the doors open. They creaked protestingly on rusted hinges, revealing a scene straight out of her darkest memories. The ward was long and narrow, lined with beds separated by curtains once white, but now gray with age and dust. And in each bed lay a figure, twisted and still. She walked among them, her footsteps echoing like gunshots through the silence. Each face turned towards her, eyes wide and glassy, mouths open in silent screams. They were dolls, grotesque parodies of humanity carved from wood, or cast from wax, or fashioned from God knows what else. Yet there was something familiar about their features, something that sent cold dread coiling through Evelyn's gut. Then she saw it, a bed at the far end, tucked away in shadows so deep they seemed solid. Upon it lay little Jane Doe, her face a twisted mask of horror, arms outstretched as if begging for mercy or rescue. But what froze Evelyn's blood was not the doll itself, but what hung above it on the wall. A painting. Faded with time, but still unmistakable. A portrait of herself at 17, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes bright and laughing. Beneath it were words scrawled in what appeared to be blood. Playtime's over, Evelyn. Now it's your turn. She stumbled back, hands flying to her mouth to stifle the scream rising within her. This was wrong. All of this was horribly, inexplicably wrong. She had to leave, had to get out while she still could. But even as she turned to flee, she knew it was too late. The hospital had her now, its grip tight and unyielding. It wanted something from her. Something she didn't understand, but feared nonetheless. And until she gave it what it desired, there would be no escape. So she did the only thing she could. She ran. Ran down the length of the ward, past rows of twisted dolls, and out into the corridor beyond. Behind her she heard footsteps echoing hers, pursuing hers. Heavy footsteps that seemed to shake the very foundations of St. Mercy itself. She didn't look back. Didn't dare. Instead, she focused on the path ahead, on finding a way out, any way out. There had to be an exit somewhere among these labyrinthine halls. There simply had to be. But every turn revealed only more decaying corridors, filled with shadows that seemed to reach for her, whispering promises of madness and despair. She was lost now, utterly lost, adrift in a sea of forgotten memories and twisted nightmares. And still she ran, heart hammering against ribs like a caged beast, breath tearing from lungs in ragged gasps. Because even if there was no escape, even if this chase ended only in madness or death, she would not stop. Not until the very last moment did she intend to give up, to surrender. Because Evelyn Hartley had faced monsters before, both within herself and without. And though St. Mercy Hospital might be her ultimate challenge, it would not be her undoing. Not today. Not ever. The echo of Evelyn's footfalls finally faded into silence, leaving behind a void so complete it seemed as if time itself had held its breath. She leaned against the cold wall, gasping for air that tasted stale and heavy with decay. Her heart throbbed in her ears like a drumbeat, slow and steady now, but no less insistent. As she waited for her vision to stop swimming, Evelyn became aware of another sound. Faint at first, barely discernible over the roar of blood in her veins, it grew louder with each passing second. A melody, played on an unseen piano, drifting through the empty halls like a ghostly whisper. She knew that tune. It had echoed through these very corridors during her tenure at St. Mercy, accompaniment to countless nights spent tending to patients who never slept. But none of those nights had felt quite like this, heavy with dread and pregnant with promise, as if the very air hummed with anticipation. Evelyn pushed away from the wall, her footsteps echoing softly as she followed the music. It seemed to guide her deeper into the heart of the hospital, past wards she recognized, and others she'd never seen before. Each note resonated within her chest, stirring memories both sweet and sorrowful. She felt like a marionette, being controlled by some unseen puppeteer, drawn inexorably forward by forces beyond her comprehension. The music led her to a familiar intersection, 3 hallways branching out like fingers from a central hub. To the left lay the surgical wing, long abandoned now, but once buzzing with life and urgency. Straight ahead was the administrative section, filled with offices that had been emptied of everything save for dust and echoes. And to the right, Evelyn turned towards the 3rd hallway, her steps slowing as she approached the wooden doors carved with intricate organic patterns. The word orchard was etched into the arch above them, its letters worn smooth by time and touch. Behind these doors lay the ward for patients deemed beyond hope, those whose minds had shattered like glass under the weight of their own darkness. She hesitated before entering, hand hovering over the tarnished doorknob. This place held secrets she'd long ago buried deep within herself, truths too terrible to confront even in the safety of her own memories. Yet here she was, drawn back by something stronger than fear or common sense. The moment she stepped inside, the music stopped abruptly, as if it had served its purpose, guiding her here, and now there was nothing left but silence. A thick, oppressive silence that seemed to press against her skin like a physical weight. Evelyn walked down the center aisle of the ward, her gaze darting from side to side, taking in the rows of empty beds, the faded murals painted on walls, meant to soothe, but now only served to unsettle. Everything was exactly as she remembered it. Too exact, too perfect. It felt staged, like a set designed for some twisted play. Halfway down the ward, she heard it again. The faint whimpering sound that had haunted her dreams since childhood. It seemed to emanate from every corner at once, echoing off cold stone walls until its source became impossible to pinpoint. Yet despite its elusive nature, there was no mistaking the anguish in that cry. She followed it, letting it guide her towards a section of the ward she'd never cared to linger near before. Here the beds were closer together, separated by mere inches rather than feet. And here, too, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, almost palpable, as if the very air was saturated with despair. The whimpering led Evelyn to a bed tucked away in the farthest corner, shrouded by shadows so thick they seemed almost alive. As she approached, she saw that something lay upon it. No, not something. Someone. A figure, huddled beneath a threadbare blanket, face buried in hands that trembled like leaves. "Hello?" Evelyn called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is anyone there?" The figure stirred slightly but did not respond. Instead, the whimpering grew louder, more insistent now, as if begging for release from a throat too tight with terror to scream. Evelyn reached out tentatively, touching the edge of the blanket closest to her. It felt cold beneath her fingers, damp with condensation despite the room's chill. As she began to pull it back gently, revealing the figure inch by agonizing inch, she felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu wash over her. She had done this before, stood here, in this very spot, performing this same action. But when? And why couldn't she remember? Finally, the blanket fell away completely, revealing a head of matted hair and shoulders hunched inward as if expecting a blow. Evelyn leaned closer, peering into the shadows to get her first clear look at the face hidden within. And then she screamed. Because staring back at her were eyes filled with madness and recognition. Eyes that belonged to someone she knew all too well, herself. The reflection blinked slowly, its lips curling into a smile, as it regarded Evelyn with an unsettling familiarity. "You took your time getting here," it whispered, voice cracked like dry earth after years of drought. "But then again, time moves differently inside St. Mercy. You know that better than anyone." Evelyn stumbled back, horrified disbelief rooting her to the spot. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. And yet there she stood, staring at herself from across a chasm of madness. "You're not real," she whispered, backing away until she collided with something solid, another bed, perhaps, or maybe a wall. She didn't dare take her eyes off the reflection long enough to look. "Am I not?" The figure mimicked Evelyn's movements perfectly, mirroring every step she took backwards. "Then why can you see me? Why do I feel so?" "You're just a memory," Evelyn insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. A hallucination brought on by stress and fear. "Is that what you tell yourself?" The reflection laughed softly, a sound like dry leaves rustling beneath foot. "How convenient for you. But consider this. If I'm merely a figment of your imagination, then who's to say which one of us is the true illusion?" Evelyn shook her head vehemently, refusing to entertain such thoughts. This couldn't be happening. None of it could be real. But even as she denied its existence, she knew. Deep down in a place she'd long since buried, she understood that this reflection was no mere apparition. It was something far worse, a manifestation of all her darkest fears, all her deepest regrets given form and voice. And it wanted something from her. "Why are you here?" she asked softly, defeat resonating in every syllable. "What do you want?" The reflection regarded her silently for several moments before answering. "We need your help, Evelyn. Both of us." "We? You can't save him," the reflection said suddenly, voice growing urgent. "Not unless you let go first." "Save who?" Evelyn demanded, confusion warring with fear within her chest. "Who are you talking about?" Evelyn stood there, breath held captive in her lungs, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. She felt frozen, paralyzed by the surreal exchange with her reflection. But beneath that paralysis, something stirred. A memory, perhaps? Or maybe an instinct long buried but not entirely forgotten. With sudden clarity, she realized what she had to do. She needed to break the spell, shatter the illusion before it consumed her completely. Acting on impulse, she spun around and reached out, fingers brushing against cold metal. A matchbook, left behind by some unknown smoker, lay forgotten atop a bedside table. She struck a match, its head flaring to life with an almost obscene brightness in the gloom of Orchard Ward. The flame danced, casting eerie shadows on the walls lined with forgotten beds and broken dreams. Evelyn held it close to her reflection's face, watching as the light flickered over that familiar yet alien visage. "Burn," she whispered, half prayer, half command. "Just burn away." But the flame only guttered in response, its light refusing to touch the reflection. Instead, it seemed to grow brighter, illuminating Orchard Ward with an almost holy intensity. Shadows danced and twisted, taking on forms that seemed almost alive. Evelyn watched, hypnotized by the play of light and dark until she felt a cold, clammy hand close around her wrist. She screamed, dropping the matchbook onto the linoleum floor where it fizzled out, leaving them shrouded in darkness once more. "You shouldn't have come here," her reflection whispered, voice echoing as if spoken from within a deep well. "This place, it belongs to us now." Evelyn wrenched free of that icy grip, backing away until she collided with something solid. Another bed, its frame rusted with age and disuse. She groped along its edge, fingers brushing against cold metal again, this time encountering a small wooden drawer tucked into the side panel. Inside lay an old-fashioned key, its teeth tarnished with age but still sharp. It was heavy in her hand, reminiscent of something she'd once held long ago, a feeling that both comforted and terrified her simultaneously. Looking for a way out? The reflection moved closer, moving silently through the dark, like a ghostly wraith. "There are no exits here, Evelyn, not unless you find what you're looking for." "What am I supposed to be looking for?" she demanded, desperation clawing at her throat. She gripped the key tightly, its sharp edges biting into her palm. The reflection smiled sadly, moonlight casting its silver glow over those familiar features now marred by sorrow. "Answers," it said simply. "The truth." Before Evelyn could press further, a sudden noise echoed through Orchard Ward, a faint clicking sound, like footsteps walking across a hardwood floor. But there were no floors here, only cold linoleum and the forgotten echoes of pain. The reflection turned towards the sound, eyes widening in fear or anticipation. It was impossible to tell which. "He's coming," it whispered urgently. "You must hide." "Who?" Evelyn asked, but her voice was swallowed by another noise, a soft whimpering sound that seemed to emanate from every direction at once. Evelyn froze, terror rooting her to the spot as she recognized that familiar sound. It was the same one that had haunted her childhood dreams, the same one that had driven her away from St. Mercy all those years ago. And now it was back, louder than ever before, pressing against her eardrums like a physical force. She wanted to run, to flee far away from this place and its terrible secrets. But she knew better than anyone else how futile such efforts would be. Instead, she stood still, heart pounding wildly as she waited for whatever horror was about to reveal itself. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, echoing through Orchard Ward like a funereal march. And then, suddenly, they stopped altogether. Silence descended once more, heavy and oppressive as a physical weight. And in that silence, Evelyn heard something else, a faint whisper of sound, barely audible but unmistakable nonetheless. It was the rustling of paper, soft as a sigh but equally unsettling. Her breath caught in her throat. Evelyn turned slowly towards the source of the noise. There, on the other side of Orchard Ward, stood a row of tall wardrobes, their doors slightly ajar. And from within those depths came that faint rustling sound, growing louder now, more insistent. Evelyn took a tentative step forward, then another, each one feeling heavier than the last, as if she were wading through deep water rather than walking across solid ground. The wardrobes loomed before her, their doors creaking open wider with every step she took, until finally she stood directly in front of them. She reached out hesitantly, fingers brushing against smooth wood before curling around one door handle. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever horrors lay hidden within those depths, and pulled. Light flooded into Orchard Ward, revealing not the expected piles of dusty clothing, but instead rows upon rows of neatly arranged books. Medical journals, by the looks of them, their spines worn with age and use. And at the very center of it all stood one book unlike any other, its cover bearing her name in elegant script. Evelyn approached cautiously, as if approaching a venomous snake rather than merely a book. She reached out tentatively, fingers brushing against leather-bound spine, before wrapping around it and pulling it free from its brethren. It felt heavy in her hands, weighted somehow with more than just paper and ink. As she opened it, the scent of aged parchment filled her nostrils, transporting her back to a time long past. A time when she still believed in hope, when she still believed in miracles. But there were no miracles here, only cruel truths etched onto yellowed pages in her own handwriting. Dates, times, observations, all written in meticulous detail, each entry ending with the same cryptic phrase. Progress continues. Patient remains stable. Except for one entry, dated sometime during her final weeks at St. Mercy. That one read differently. Patient deteriorating rapidly. Hallucinations increasing in frequency and intensity. Suspect traumatic memories beginning to surface. Must redouble efforts to keep patient grounded. Evelyn stared at those words, shock coursing through her veins like liquid ice. This wasn't possible. She'd never written such things, never kept such detailed records of whoever this patient was. Had she? She flipped through the pages faster now, eyes scanning lines of text too painful to read but impossible to ignore. And there it was, another entry that caught her attention, an observation made on what should have been her last day at St. Mercy. Patient has begun speaking in tongues again. Claims to hear voices, sees things that aren't there. Insists we're all trapped inside the hospital together. Fear growing stronger by the hour. Must find a way to break through before it consumes us both. Evelyn closed the journal sharply, heart pounding wildly. Evelyn stood there, gripping the journal tightly, its cover smooth beneath her fingers. The words seemed to burn into her eyes, searing themselves onto her mind's eye, even as she tried to blink them away. She felt dizzy, disoriented, as if the very foundations of reality had shifted beneath her feet. A soft thud echoed through the room, startling her. She looked up, heart hammering against her ribs like a caged animal. Another book had fallen from its perch on the shelf, landing open and face down on the worn carpet. Evelyn approached it warily, bending down to pick it up. As she did, she noticed something peculiar. The pages were blank except for one phrase scrawled in large, looping letters. "We are still here." A chill slithered down her spine, coiling around her bones like a frozen serpent. She placed the book back onto the shelf, careful not to disturb its precarious stack of brethren. As she straightened up, she caught sight of something else that made her blood run cold, a figure reflected in the dusty glass panes of the window. It was her reflection again, but different this time. The face was obscured by bandages, stained yellow with age and spattered with something darker, drier. She couldn't see her own eyes behind those swaths of cloth, but she could feel them watching her, boring into her soul like twin daggers. Evelyn spun around, heart pounding wildly, but there was nothing there. Just empty air and the lingering scent of aged parchment. She turned back to the window, breath fogging up the glass in panicked puffs. The reflection was gone, replaced by the familiar sight of her own terrified face. She backed away from the window, eyes never leaving her own haunted gaze until she bumped into something solid. Turning, she found herself staring at a bank of ancient filing cabinets, their metal surfaces dented and scratched with time. Each drawer was labeled meticulously in neat typed letters. Admissions, discharges, treatments, deaths. Evelyn's stomach churned at that last label. She reached out hesitantly, grasping the cold handle of the drawer marked deaths. It squealed loudly as she pulled it open, revealing rows upon rows of manila folders, each one bearing a name and date written in her own handwriting. She hesitated before reaching for the first folder, fingers trembling slightly. As she pulled it out, something fluttered to the floor, a small photograph, its edges worn soft with age. Picking it up, Evelyn found herself staring into the face of a young woman, no more than 25 years old. She looked familiar somehow, though Evelyn couldn't quite place where she'd seen her before. Opening the folder, Evelyn scanned the contents quickly. Medical records, photographs, notes, all detailing the life and tragic death of one Sarah Thompson. According to these documents, Sarah had been admitted to St. Mercy's suffering from severe anxiety and dissociative identity disorder. She'd responded well initially to treatment, but then began experiencing vivid nightmares that left her terrified and disoriented. Evelyn read on, her heart growing heavier with each page turned. Sarah's condition deteriorated rapidly towards the end of her stay at St. Mercy. Her nightmares became more intense, more violent, until finally, they killed her. The cause of death was listed as homicidal ideation during sleep, whatever that meant. Evelyn frowned, flipping through the pages again, searching for some explanation she could understand. And then she found it, a note written in her own handwriting. Patient became violent during REM sleep last night. Strangled another patient before we could intervene. Claims no memory of incident upon waking. Fear growing stronger by the hour. Evelyn dropped the folder like it was on fire, backing away until she collided with another cabinet. She sank down onto the floor, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped around them tightly as if trying to physically hold herself together. Around her, the hospital seemed to hum with a low, ominous energy, like an orchestra tuning their instruments before a grim symphony. Shadows lengthened, stretching across walls and floors until they seemed almost alive, writhing and twisting in ways that made Evelyn's eyes water from staring too hard at them. And then came the dreams. They began suddenly, violently, pulling her under with cruel efficiency. She was back in St. Mercy again, walking down familiar corridors lined with peeling paint and flickering lights. Patients moaned softly from their beds, faces obscured by bandages stained yellow with age and something darker, drier. Evelyn tried to wake up, but it was no use. The dream held her fast, forcing her to watch as she made her rounds, checking on each patient carefully before moving onto the next one. Only this time, their eyes followed her, burning into her soul even behind those bandages. She reached Sarah Thompson's room finally, pushing open the door cautiously. Inside, Sarah lay sleeping fitfully, tangled sheets damp with sweat. Evelyn approached the bed slowly, reaching out to touch Sarah's forehead gently. It felt hot, feverish, and when she pulled her hand away, she saw that it was stained red with blood. Suddenly, Sarah's eyes flew open, wide and wild with terror. She lunged at Evelyn, hands like claws, teeth bared in a snarl of pure hatred. But instead of attacking, Sarah grabbed hold of Evelyn's wrists, pulling them tight against her own chest as she began to speak in rapid bursts. "You're one of us now," she hissed, eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. "You're trapped here just like we are." Evelyn struggled to break free, heart pounding wildly in her chest. But Sarah's grip was unbreakable, her strength fueled by madness and fear. "Trapped," Sarah repeated, voice dropping to a low growl. "All of us trapped together inside the hospital forever." Evelyn woke with a start, bolting upright in bed, heart racing like a runaway train. She could still feel Sarah's hands around her wrists, still hear her voice echoing in her ears like a nightmare made manifest. She threw back the covers, jumping out of bed and rushing to the window. It was still dark outside, the moon casting long shadows across the deserted grounds of St. Mercy. But something had changed. The sense of emptiness she'd felt before was gone, replaced by an unsettling feeling of occupation. As if sensing her gaze, a light flickered on in one of the distant windows, casting an eerie glow against the night sky. Then another lit up further down the hallway, followed by another, and another, until the entire hospital seemed to be ablaze with ghostly illumination. Evelyn backed away from the window, heart pounding wildly again. She knew she should leave, run as far and fast as she could from this God-forsaken place. But she couldn't move, rooted to the spot by sheer terror. Because now she heard it, that familiar childhood terror whispering through the darkness like a spectral wind. The whimpering sound had returned, louder than. In the silence that followed, Evelyn's breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. The hairs on her arms stood on end as an icy breeze seemed to blow through her very soul, carrying with it a sense of malevolent presence. She felt eyes watching her, unseen but undeniable. The hospital was alive again, but not with the comforting hum of life-saving machines or hushed voices of dedicated staff. It pulsed with something far more sinister, an ancient, malevolent heartbeat that echoed through its crumbling walls like a dreadful symphony. Evelyn backed away from the window, her gaze locked onto the distant lights flickering on and off like strobes in some macabre rave. She knew she should turn around, flee back to her makeshift bed in the library, but her feet refused to cooperate. It was as if the very floor itself had turned against her, ensnaring her in its grip. A faint scratching sound caught her attention, drawing her eyes away from the lights. It came from behind her, soft and rhythmic like fingernails tapping on glass. She could almost see it, those bandaged hands she'd seen reflected earlier, now pressing against the window panes, beckoning her closer. She spun around, heart hammering in her chest, but there was nothing there save empty darkness and her own terrified reflection. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn's eyes darted back to the hallway outside her room. More lights had joined the macabre dance, their flickering casting elongated shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like serpents. And amongst them, something else moved, a faint silhouette flitting from one light to another with impossible speed. She blinked, trying to focus on it, but every time she thought she caught sight of its form, it vanished into the gloom, only to reappear elsewhere down the hallway. It was as if the very fabric of reality had torn open at St. Mercy, allowing something otherworldly to pass through. The temperature dropped again, and this time Evelyn could see her breath hanging in the air like spectral tendrils. Goosebumps prickled her skin, not just from the cold, but also from a creeping dread that seemed to seep into her very bones. She hugged herself tightly, rubbing at her arms in an attempt to generate some warmth. Then she heard it, the whimpering sound from her nightmare, now louder and more insistent than ever before. It echoed down the hallway, like a lost child crying out for its mother, filled with such profound despair that Evelyn felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She turned towards the sound, following it as it seemed to beckon her deeper into the hospital's heart. The walls closed in around her, their once sterile surfaces now stained and peeling, revealing glimpses of the decay that lay beneath. As she walked, the whimpering grew louder still, accompanied by other sounds, whispers and moans that seemed to resonate within the very walls themselves. Evelyn reached out tentatively, tracing her fingers along the cool stone, as if seeking some connection with whatever lay beyond. And then she felt it, a sudden cold spot where nothing should have been but warmth. It was like plunging her hand into an icy stream, and yet there was no moisture, only an unnatural chill that seemed to bite deep into her flesh. She snatched her hand away, stifling a gasp of surprise as the cold spot expanded rapidly, spreading outwards along the wall like some spectral stain. Within moments, the entire hallway had been consumed by it, and Evelyn could see her breath fogging up before her face even though she stood stock still. The whimpering grew louder still, now accompanied by a low hum that seemed to vibrate through every fiber of her being. It resonated deep within her chest, setting her teeth on edge and making her stomach churn with nausea. She wanted nothing more than to flee, but her body refused to obey her commands. Instead, she found herself drawn forward once more, stepping into the heart of the cold spot, as if compelled by some unseen force. The air grew thick around her, heavy with an ancient malevolence that seemed to press down upon her from all sides. She could feel it now, a palpable presence filled with hatred and anger, trapped here for eternity within these forsaken walls. Evelyn reached out again, this time placing her hand flat against the icy stone wall. She felt something move beneath her touch, like worms burrowing just beneath the surface of the plaster. Then came a voice, soft but insistent, whispering directly into her ear. "We are still here." She recoiled, stumbling backwards as the words echoed around her, multiplying and overlapping until they filled the entire hallway with their malevolent refrain. The cold spot seemed to expand further still, seeping out onto the floor and creeping towards her like a living thing. Evelyn turned to run, but it was too late. The cold had already reached her feet, wrapping around her ankles like icy chains and anchoring her in place. She struggled against them, desperation lending her strength as she fought to free herself from their grip. But the more she fought, the tighter they held her, until finally she could barely move at all. Panic surged within her, threatening to consume every last vestige of rational thought. This was not right. None of this was meant to happen. Then, with a suddenness that stole her breath away, everything changed. The lights flickered once more before plunging the entire hospital into darkness, so profound it seemed as if someone had reached out and switched off the very world itself. For a moment, Evelyn could see nothing at all, not even her own hand held up before her eyes. And then, gradually, shapes began to emerge from the gloom. Ghostly figures materialized all around her, their forms wavering like heat haze on a summer's day. They were people, or they had been once upon a time. But now they were little more than spectral echoes trapped within St. Mercy's twisted embrace. Evelyn watched in horror as they moved closer, their faces filled with rage and despair. She could see now why the hospital had been abandoned so abruptly all those years ago. No one had wanted to leave these tormented souls behind. One figure floated towards her, its bandaged hands reaching out as if seeking some connection. As it drew near, Evelyn realized that it was Sarah Thompson, or at least what remained of her after death, had claimed her body and trapped her spirit within this godforsaken place. "You're one of us now," Sarah hissed, her voice echoing around them like a discordant symphony. "You can't leave here anymore." Evelyn screamed, lunging backwards with all her might as the icy chill gripped hold of her once more. But there was nowhere to run, no escape from this hellish nightmare she'd become ensnared within. The figures closed in around her, their touch like ice upon her flesh as they reached out with those bandaged hands, beckoning her closer still. "We are still here," they whispered in unison, their voices. The darkness receded slowly, as if reluctant to relinquish its hold on St. Mercy's long-abandoned corridors. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart pounding wildly against her ribcage like a trapped animal. The spectral figures dissipated into the gloom, leaving behind an oppressive silence that felt almost tangible. She became aware of something cold clutched in her hand. Sarah Thompson's locket. Its chain had snapped during their struggle, and now it hung limp from Evelyn's trembling fingers. She stared at it, mesmerized by its innocuous appearance despite the horrifying ordeal she'd just witnessed. A sudden flicker of light startled her back to reality. The hospital's lights stuttered once more before stabilizing into a dim, jaundiced glow that seemed to accentuate every shadow and crevice. Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead, then turned towards the morgue. The heavy door groaned open, on rusted hinges, revealing a room bathed in an eerie green luminescence cast by ancient fluorescent tubes overhead. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, making it difficult to breathe without wanting to retch. Rows upon rows of metal drawers lined the walls like macabre filing cabinets waiting to be opened. Evelyn approached them cautiously, each footfall echoing ominously in the silence. Her eyes scanned the labels etched onto the drawers. Dates, names, causes of death. Most were illegible after decades of neglect, but one caught her attention. Thompson, Sarah. She hesitated before pulling it open, half expecting another spectral apparition to emerge. But there was only an empty shell within, devoid of any trace that Sarah had ever occupied it. Relief washed over Evelyn briefly before curiosity gnawed at her once more. If Sarah wasn't here, where was she? She continued down the aisle, running gloved fingers along the cold metal drawers until she found another name familiar from her nightmares. Evelyn Hartley. Her own name sent a shiver down her spine as she yanked open the drawer with trembling hands. This time, there was something inside. Lying motionless on the stainless steel tray was a woman, herself, according to the tag attached to her toe. But this Evelyn was not the same one who had entered St. Mercy just hours ago. She was emaciated, pale, and completely still, save for the faint rise and fall of her chest beneath a thin white sheet. A gasp escaped Evelyn's lips as she reached out tentative fingers to touch her other self's forehead. It felt clammy and cold, like marble. Her eyes flicked back and forth between this unconscious version of herself and the bandaged figure from her nightmares, finding similarities that made her stomach churn. Then she noticed something else. A pair of fresh bandages wrapped around the woman's face, covering everything but her mouth and nose. They were identical to those in Evelyn's dreams. Crisp white fabric with perfect symmetrical folds, tied securely at either side with neat bows. The sight sent bile rising up her throat as memories of that faceless figure looming over her flooded back. "Who did this?" she whispered aloud, though there was no one left alive to answer. Her gaze fell upon a nearby table cluttered with medical instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps, and bandages. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that whoever had done this might still be here somewhere within St. Mercy's labyrinthine corridors. Suddenly, Evelyn heard it again. The soft tapping sound like fingernails against glass. It echoed through the morgue, growing louder with each passing second until it seemed to come from all around her simultaneously. Panic surged within her once more as she whirled around, searching desperately for its source. There, by the door leading back into the hospital proper, a shadow flitted past, barely discernible amidst the flickering lights and encroaching darkness. It moved too swiftly to be human, yet somehow familiar. Evelyn remembered then the fleeting silhouette she'd glimpsed earlier, how it had dashed along the hallway with impossible speed before disappearing around a corner. Could this be the same entity? And if so, what did it want? She hesitated, torn between fleeing back towards the safety of her car or venturing deeper into St. Mercy's bowels in pursuit of answers. The tapping ceased abruptly, leaving only silence once more. No, not quite silence. There was another sound now. Faint but unmistakable. A low moaning that seemed to resonate from deep within the hospital itself. It called to her, beckoning like a siren song, luring sailors onto treacherous rocks. Evelyn felt an inexplicable compulsion drawing her towards it, urging her to follow despite every instinct screaming at her to run far away from this place of madness and despair. With newfound resolve, she stepped out into the corridor once more, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The moaning grew louder, guiding her down twisting passages and through deserted wards until finally, she stood before a set of double doors marked restricted access. Beyond them lay the source of the noise, a large operating theater bathed in an unnatural glow emanating from somewhere above. Evelyn pushed cautiously through the doors, her heart pounding wildly in her chest as she took in the scene before her. The room was dominated by a massive operating table positioned beneath a bank of ancient medical lamps casting their eerie light down onto whatever lay upon it. Surrounding this makeshift altar were more spectral figures, their bandaged hands raised towards something they seemed to be worshipping, or perhaps guarding. As Evelyn crept closer, she saw that it was not an idol but another person lying there, a woman with bandages covering her face just like those in Evelyn's nightmares. She recognized the form immediately. It was herself again, still comatose and barely breathing. Yet there were differences too. This Evelyn wore a hospital gown stained dark with blood, and her arms were restrained free, flopping limply against the table's edge as if she'd been posed rather than placed there. A sudden chill washed over Evelyn, colder even than the icy grip she'd felt earlier. This was no longer merely a dream or hallucination. This was something real, happening right now within St. Mercy's walls. And whoever, whatever, had done this knew her name, knew what she looked like. Her gaze flicked back to the bandaged figures hovering around the operating table. They seemed to have noticed her presence now, turning towards her with slow, deliberate movements that sent shivers down her spine. One by one, they began to lower their hands until they hung at their sides, palms facing outwards in silent invitation. As if compelled against her will, Evelyn stepped closer still, drawn inexorably towards the figure upon the table. The moaning grew louder still, reverberating within her very bones as she reached out trembling fingers to touch the bandages covering her other self's face. "Don't," whispered a voice from behind her, barely audible over the cacophony of noise filling the theater. "Please, don't wake her." Evelyn froze. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, a sudden lump forming as she recognized the voice. It was familiar yet distant, like an echo from another lifetime. She turned slowly, knowing already who she would find standing there. The figure leaned against the doorway, half in shadow cast by the flickering lights above. They were dressed in clothing reminiscent of another era, a simple white gown cinched at the waist with a length of cloth that hung down to their knees. Their hands were bare, except for the same bandages as before, wrapped around wrists and palms like leprous stigmata. As Evelyn's eyes adjusted, she realized it wasn't just any figure from her past. It was herself, or rather, a younger version, perhaps 15 years younger than the woman she'd become. The face beneath the tattered remnants of bandage was hers, but altered, cheeks hollowed out by time and hardship, eyes haunted with memories only they shared. "You," Evelyn whispered, barely able to find her voice. "You're me." The other nodded slowly, sadly. "Yes," she said, stepping further into the light so that Evelyn could see her clearly. "I am you, Evelyn. Or at least I was once upon a time." Evelyn shook her head, disbelieving. How is this possible?" "I don't know." The younger Evelyn shrugged helplessly. "All I remember is waking up here, alone and confused. And then they came." She gestured vaguely towards the bandaged figures hovering around the operating table. They seemed to have relaxed now that she'd entered, their forms shifting into less threatening postures as they watched the two Evelyns with silent interest. "But why?" Evelyn asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Why are you here? Why am I here?" Her doppelganger looked down at her bandaged hands, then back up again. I think it has something to do with this." She reached out one of those wraith-like hands and touched Evelyn's cheek, gently. The touch sent shivers through her, cold yet oddly comforting. Then the younger woman traced a path downwards, tapping lightly on Evelyn's chest just above where her heart lay beating wildly. "This is where it began," she said softly. "Here, in our hearts. Something broke loose. Something dark and twisted that we'd both been carrying around with us for years." Evelyn felt a chill spread through her as memories resurfaced, fragments of dreams long buried, nightmares she'd tried to forget. Visions of bandaged figures lurking in shadows, whispers echoing down endless hallways. "You're talking about the hospital," she said slowly, piecing it together. "About what happened here when we were kids." Her double nodded grimly. "Yes, all these years we thought we'd escaped St. Mercy's grasp. But it never truly let us go. It was always there, festering inside us like a cancer. And now it seems to have taken control completely." She looked around at the spectral figures surrounding them, her expression filled with despair. "These are our nightmares made manifest," she said. "Our guilt, our fear, our rage, given form and substance by whatever force still lingers within these walls." Evelyn felt a wave of nausea wash over her as she took in the full horror of their situation. All this time, they'd believed themselves free from St. Mercy's influence. But it had been here all along, hidden deep inside them like some dormant evil waiting for the chance to strike. "But why now?" she asked, trying to understand. "What changed?" Her younger self seemed to shrink back slightly, as if reluctant to share something painful. Then she took a deep breath and said, I think it was you, Evelyn. You came back here seeking answers, and in doing so, you stirred up everything we'd tried so hard to forget." She held out her bandaged hands once more, turning them slowly as if examining something written upon their surface. "These represent our sins," she said quietly. "The things we did, or rather, the things that were done to us here. We can't escape them, Evelyn. Not really. They're a part of us now forever." Evelyn felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes as she listened to her younger self unravel their shared history like a threadbare tapestry. It was true. They'd both tried so hard to leave St. Mercy behind them, to build new lives elsewhere. But It had all been an illusion, built on lies and denial. "You shouldn't have come back here," the other Evelyn said sadly. "You shouldn't have opened up old wounds like this." "But I had to know," Evelyn protested weakly. "I needed to understand why everything happened the way it did." Her double looked at her with pity. "And now you do," she said softly. "But at what cost?" Before Evelyn could respond, there was a sudden movement behind them. She turned just in time to see one of the bandaged figures lunging towards her, arms outstretched like some grotesque marionette. Evelyn stumbled backwards, falling against the operating table with a gasp as she felt cold metal dig into her spine. The figure loomed over her, its faceless visage inches from hers now, and she could feel its breath hot on her cheek, rank and rotting, like decayed flesh left too long in the sun. Then, without warning, it reached out one bandaged hand and grabbed her by the throat. Fingers tightened around her windpipe, squeezing until she could barely draw breath. She struggled wildly, kicking out at its legs, but it seemed undeterred by her efforts, standing firm as a statue carved from stone. "It's time," it rasped, voice like gravel grinding together. "Time to wake up now." Evelyn felt panic surging through her veins, hot and primal. She clawed desperately at the figure's hands, nails digging into flesh beneath the bandages, but still it refused to release its grip. Then, suddenly, another pair of hands appeared beside hers, prying at the fingers around her throat until they finally loosened enough for Evelyn to drag in a ragged breath. Her younger self stood between her and the figure now, eyes blazing with defiance as she faced down their attacker. "Get back," she snarled, voice filled with authority. "This isn't your business anymore." For a moment, Evelyn thought the creature might refuse to comply. Then slowly, it released its grip on her throat and stepped backwards into the shadows once more. The other bandaged figures seemed to melt away too, disappearing silently as if they'd never been there at all. Evelyn sagged against the operating table, coughing weakly as she tried to regain control of her breathing. Her younger self turned back to her, concern etched deep into her features. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Evelyn nodded weakly. "I think so," she managed to croak out. "What happened? Why did they leave?" Her doppelganger. Evelyn's younger self offered her a hand, helping her slide down from the operating table until they both stood on trembling legs. The air felt thick with tension, as if the very walls of St. Mercy's held their breath in anticipation. "We shouldn't linger here," Evelyn's doppelganger whispered, glancing nervously around the empty room. "They'll be back, stronger next time." Evelyn nodded, her throat raw and tender. She could still feel the phantom pressure of those bandaged fingers wrapped around her neck. As they moved cautiously towards the door, she noticed something peculiar. The once bright moonlight streaming through the window seemed to have dimmed considerably, casting everything in a sickly gray pallor. As they stepped into the corridor, Evelyn felt an unsettling sensation crawl up her spine, like unseen eyes watching their every move. The hairs on her arms stood on end, and she fought the urge to shiver. Her younger self seemed to sense it too. She reached out, grasping Evelyn's hand tightly as if seeking comfort or reassurance. Together they made their way down the eerily silent hallway, the only sound of their soft footfalls echoing through the darkness. The once familiar corridors of St. Mercy's now felt alien and hostile, each twist and turn bringing new horrors into view. Paint peeled from walls like sunburnt skin, revealing rotten timber beneath. Doors hung ajar on broken hinges, offering glimpses into rooms filled with decaying memories. They rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with another of those terrible figures. It stood motionless, arms hanging limp at its sides, but Evelyn could feel the malice radiating from it like heat from an open flame. Beside her, her doppelganger sucked in a sharp breath. "We need to go," she hissed urgently, tugging on Evelyn's hand. "Now, I'll..." But before they could flee, another figure appeared behind them, blocking their escape route. Then another, and another still, until they were surrounded by the faceless horrors. Their bandaged hands hung like dead weights at their sides, but there was no mistaking the menace they posed. Trapped, Evelyn felt her heart pound wildly in her chest. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do something, anything, but fear rooted her to the spot. Beside her, her younger self seemed undaunted by their predicament. She stepped forward, placing herself between Evelyn and their pursuers. "We won't let you take us back," she declared, voice steady despite the circumstances. "We won't let you control our lives any longer." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, one of the figures began to move. It stepped towards them, its gait unnatural, jerky, like a puppet controlled by an unseen puppeteer. As it drew closer, Evelyn could make out faint words etched into the bandages covering its face. "I did not ask for this." A chill ran through her, cold as ice water. Those were her own words, spoken long ago during one of their shared nightmares. She looked from the figure to her younger self and back again, realization dawning. "They're us," she whispered hoarsely. "All of them. They're our guilt, our fear, our anger made manifest." Her doppelganger nodded grimly. "And until we face those emotions head on, they'll keep coming for us." The figure halted before them, close enough now that Evelyn could see the fraying edges of its bandages, the faint stains of something darker than mere dirt. It tilted its head to one side, regarding them with empty eye sockets. "I did not ask for this," it repeated, voice echoing eerily through the hallway. Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself against the horror standing before her. Beside her, her younger self seemed to do the same. "We know," Evelyn said softly. "We know you didn't." The figure hesitated, then reached out one bandaged hand towards them. For a moment Evelyn thought it might strike out at them again. Instead, it merely hovered there, as if waiting for something. Her doppelganger stepped forward, taking the offered hand in hers. She looked up into those empty eye sockets, her expression filled with resolve. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We're both sorry." As she spoke, Evelyn felt something shift within her, like a weight being lifted from her shoulders after years of carrying it alone. Beside them, the figure seemed to shimmer, its form wavering like heat haze before solidifying once more. When Evelyn looked closer, she saw that the words etched into its bandages had changed. "I forgive you." The figure dropped their hands and stepped backwards, disappearing silently into the shadows. Around them, the other bandaged figures began to fade away too, melting into the darkness until none remained. Evelyn let out a shuddering breath, relieved yet terrified by what they'd just experienced. Beside her, her younger self seemed equally affected. She leaned against Evelyn for support, her body trembling slightly. "We did it," she murmured softly. "We faced them. We faced ourselves." Evelyn nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "But there's still more to do. We can't just leave now, not after everything that's happened here tonight." Her doppelganger looked up at her, confusion etched into her features. "What do you mean? We faced our fears, haven't we? Isn't that enough?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No," she replied firmly. "It isn't. Because these nightmares didn't start with us. They started here, in this hospital. And until we find out why, truly understand what happened to us all those years ago, well, I am afraid our past will never truly let us go." Together, hand in hand, they began to make their way deeper into the heart of St. Mercy's Hospital. The air grew colder with each step, the darkness heavier, but Evelyn felt a renewed sense of purpose burning within her. She knew now what she had to do. She would not leave until she'd uncovered every last secret hidden within these cursed walls. For herself, for her younger self, and for all those they'd left behind in their shared nightmares. As they ventured further into the darkness, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for them. And as if on cue, A distant sound echoed through the halls, the faint scrape of metal against stone, like a door slowly swinging open. In response, her doppelganger squeezed her hand tightly. "We're not alone," she whispered nervously. "No, no," Evelyn agreed softly. "But we won't be afraid. Not anymore." And so, side by side, they continued on into the darkness. Two halves of a whole, bound together by fate and fear, determination and dread. Whatever awaited them in St. Mercy's Hospital, they would face it together. But they were Evelyn after all. And no matter how dark the night grew, they refused to give in without a fight. The corridor stretched out before them, a seemingly endless tunnel of decaying plaster and flickering shadows. The distant sound of scraping metal faded away, leaving only the echo of their own footsteps to mark their passage. Yet, despite the silence, Evelyn felt an oppressive weight growing heavier with each step, as if the very air was conspiring against them. Her younger self leaned into her side, her grip tightening on Evelyn's hand. "It's so cold," she whispered, her breath visible in the chill. "And it feels wrong, as if we're being watched." Evelyn nodded, her eyes scanning the gloom for any sign of movement. "We are," she confirmed quietly. "But remember, we've faced our fears already. Nothing can hurt us now without our permission." Her doppelganger took a deep breath, steeling herself. "You're right. But, Evelyn, what if it's not just about us anymore? What if whatever is here wants something else from us?" Evelyn hesitated before answering. She had considered this possibility too, but she hadn't wanted to voice her fears aloud, lest they take root and grow stronger. "Then we'll give it nothing," she said firmly. "We'll face whatever comes next on our terms." As if summoned by their words, a faint light flickered into existence up ahead, casting long, dancing shadows across the peeling walls. It seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm, beckoning them closer. Evelyn could feel her heart pounding in her chest, echoing the insistent throb of the light. They approached cautiously, their footsteps slowing until they were barely audible. The light was emanating from a room at the end of the corridor. A door stood ajar, revealing only darkness within. Yet, there was no doubt that this was where they were meant to go. Evelyn pushed open the door, its hinges creaking softly in protest. She stepped inside, her younger self close behind her, their hands still clasped tightly together. The room was large and circular, like an amphitheater, with tiers of rotting seats rising up around them. At the center stood a raised dais, upon which sat a single operating table, stripped bare except for a pair of worn manacles attached to its sides. The light they had seen came from a bank of ancient lights suspended above the table, their bulbs flickering wildly as if on the verge of death. Yet, despite the chaos of the illumination, there was an undeniable focus to it. All attention was drawn inexorably towards that solitary table. Evelyn could feel her breath catching in her throat as she took in the scene before her. There was something so familiar about this place, yet so horribly alien at the same time. It was as if she had been here before, but only in nightmares. Her doppelganger tugged at her hand, pulling her back from the brink of memory. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice barely audible even within the silent theater. "What is this place? What happened here?" Before Evelyn could answer, a figure stepped out from behind one of the crumbling columns that supported the tiers above. It was humanoid in shape, but there was something wrong about it. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. As it turned to face them, they saw that its head was entirely bandaged, leaving only two dark slits where eyes should have been. In its arms, it held a young girl, her body limp and lifeless. Even from across the room, Evelyn could see the terror etched into the child's frozen features. She knew instantly who it was, she herself, as she had been all those years ago. The figure began to advance towards them, its gait stiff and unyielding. As it moved, the bandages covering its body seemed to shift and twist, revealing words scrawled beneath in a frenzied hand. "They took me, they hurt me, they made me like this." Evelyn felt bile rise in her throat as she read the words, each one driving home like a blade into her heart. She knew now what had happened here, could see it all playing out before her eyes, the surgeries, the experiments, the relentless pursuit of some twisted goal. And she understood too why this place had called to them tonight, why it had led them back through the darkness and despair of their shared past. It wanted an end, just as they did. An end to the pain, the guilt, the never-ending cycle of torment. With a cry, Evelyn lunged forward, her hands outstretched towards her younger self's limp form. But before she could reach them, the figure threw back its head and let out a piercing scream, a sound so filled with anguish and despair that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the hospital itself. And then, all at once, everything changed. The lights flickered wildly one last time, before exploding into shards of glass, plunging the theater into darkness. When Evelyn's vision cleared, she saw that the figure was no longer holding her younger self. Instead, it was cradling a mass of writhing shadows, as if trying to contain some unseen force. As she watched, horrified, the shadows began to spread, consuming the bandages that covered the figure's body until only darkness remained. Then, with one final scream, the figure collapsed in on itself, disappearing entirely into the void. In its place stood a man, tall, imposing, his face twisted with rage and sorrow. He was dressed in surgical greens, stained dark with blood and time. In his hand, he held a scalpel, its blade glinting malevolently in what little light remained. Evelyn recognized him instantly, Dr. Marcus, the man who had once been her savior, now become her tormentor, the architect of their pain. "Hello, Evelyn," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, yet echoing through the room like thunder. "I've been waiting for you." Her doppelganger gasped beside her, clutching at her arm. "Evelyn," she breathed, fear making her voice tremble. "What do we do now?" Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself against the terror that threatened to consume her. She looked into Dr. Marcus's eyes, seeing there all the horrors they had endured together, and knew what must be done. She let go of her younger self's hand, stepping forward alone. "We end this," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Once and for all?" Dr. Marcus smiled then, a slow, cruel curve of his lips that sent shivers down Evelyn's spine. "Very well," he murmured. "Let us finish what we started so long ago." And with that, he lunged at her, scalpel flashing like lightning in the darkness. Evelyn dodged just in time, feeling the blade whistle past her ear as she moved. She knew this dance all too well, had lived it 1,000 times in her nightmares. But tonight, she would not be the victim. Tonight,